Now, South Africa's mass market represents 70% of the population, and they're estimated to spend 220 billion rand annually. That's according to the findings from the Majority Report. Now, to tell us more about this segment group is Professor John Simpson, who is director from the UCT Unilever Institute. John, you've called it the Majority Report, put out by your UCT Unilever Institute of Strategic Marketing. Always interesting stuff that comes out of marketing research. Who are these people, the majority that you refer to?
Well, for the most part, they're black, I'm afraid. That's historical. But they are what we would regard as the poor sector of the country. And you may say, well, how could 70% of the population be poor? But the reality is just that. And you know, previous studies we've done where we have tended to focus on the top end, the wealthier end of the market, which is really where most marketers focus as well, is because their per capita spending power really is very much greater than the rest of the country. So we felt that when companies are starting to find the top end getting a bit tough because it's saturated, they start to say, well, let's look at the poorer end of the market. And the research we've done suggests that for the most part, they simply impose their products, their brands on the market and hope that it's going to sell. And to some extent, they've been successful, but you have to ask yourself the question, if they were doing it a bit better, if they understood the marketplace, probably they would be much more successful. And one has to say, probably they would be more supportive of the rest of the country, because we do have this kind of divide, which in every possible way, and it's certainly borne out in terms of the way in which the marketplace operates. But the fascinating thing about the bottom end of the market, which is 70%, is that they have products and services available to them which most people tend not to understand or appreciate. You know, since 1994, and whatever one might say about the present government and its approach to various things, the fact is that this country has seen massive growth in services for the poor. And so you'll see that large numbers of poor people now have a house, which they may not have had before, and the house gets electricity, it gets running water, and then with that, of course, they start to buy all those products which you and I would buy anyway. They buy the TV sets. Interestingly enough, 80% of poor people in this country watch TV daily. They have large numbers have fridges. That's well over 70% of the market, stoves and so on. And so in a sense, what we're seeing is a group of consumers who are, one might almost say, asset rich, having the house, the electricity, the stoves, the fridges, and so on and so forth, but they're cash poor. Yep. And so this is the kind of difference that we see between our own country, which many people would still regard as being a developing economy, and other developing economies elsewhere in the world. It John, really is a hybrid situation which we find ourselves in.
John,
I'm really not sure that marketers understand that.
John, you know, every now and then you hear something that is said by someone that makes a big impact, and I will never forget Professor Kader Asmal, who was Minister of Water Affairs and Education at one point, saying, don't underestimate the poor. Don't say that the poor don't have resources. I think your definition is households earning 5,000 rand or less per month, 21 million adults, 14 million children. There's a lot of pooling of money, and some companies exposed to in rural areas, for example, a company like Cash Build, there's a lot of money available in those sectors.
Absolutely, and you know the point which you talk about pooling resources is fascinating, but it's absolutely true. And in fact, what our study shows us is that the poor end of the market, and it doesn't matter whether they live in rural areas or urban areas, they move in a world which is at one stage formal and the next stage informal. So they'll buy from ShopRite, Checkers or whatever one day, and the next day they'll go into a spaza, which is completely informal. And that's the kind of life which they live in. And the same thing applies to the way they use resources. So when we talk to people in this market, we say, do you have any debt? They say, no, we don't have any debt. The reality is they do, but the debt is not formal. It's not so much the way in which you and I would understand debt. And so what they do is, why do they go to a spaza? They go to a spaza because it's convenient. And they also go to a spaza because very often the second half of the month they're very, very poor. And the spaza offers them credit. Now they don't regard that as being debt at all. That's simply a way of living. That's the kind of informality and the cohesion which we see amongst poorer people in this country. Unless marketers understand that they live in the sort of two worlds at the same time, formal and informal, they really don't understand the market. And that what they simply do, many of them, they just, as I say, they just present products, they give it to the wholesaler, and the wholesaler then sends it on, without any real regard or understanding of who their consumers are. And that came through so strongly in the study that this group of consumers, as Carter Oswald said, are surprisingly resourceful. The way they manage their money is incredibly efficient. We think that they all go to the bank to borrow money and pay massive interest rates. A bank is the last resort that these guys go to. They go through the informal system long before they go to a bank. They set up stockpiles, which are incredibly efficient ways of saving money and getting access to products and services very, very effectively. And it doesn't actually show on the economy's balance sheets. And that's really what marketers have to get to grips with.
John, I want to interrupt you there. I want to stop you there, John, just to ask you, sorry, time is an issue. We could talk all morning about these issues. But, you know, you'd say that South Africa, we've got some very good marketing people in some very good companies that cater to the consumer. Why has it taken so long for what you have researched here to dawn on them? And I mean, you've done research, but you know, anecdotal evidence and common sense would suggest that there must be a lot of money out there to be made by marketing people.
Well, there is, but if you are in a business where 70% of your income can come from the rich end of the market. Incidentally, we describe South Africa not as a pyramid. You know, there's this sort of happily used phrase about the bottom of the pyramid, and actually the bulk of our consumers are in the pyramids. So we say it's not a pyramid at all, we say it's a calabash. And the tip of the calabash is what most marketers have been focusing on with pretty good success, one has to say. But now that times are getting tough, they need to look beyond that. And there are some who've done very well. And so you could look at ShopRite, for example, done exceptionally well. But that's the formal end of the market. And the interface between formality and informality is something which many marketers really have to get to grips with.